I'm a little wobbly because I'm on my second week of bronchitis, and I thought it would be over by now, but it's not. So if I have a coughing fit, ask my wife to take me home. Yeah, the title of this is about a friend of mine named Richard Whittington, and he's probably the only person in my life that I would have considered a hero. And this is a story from the 60s. He was a reluctant hero. This is something he didn't want to do, but I badgered him and forced him into the position. Disclaimer, don't use drugs, okay? Just that. Now, my story starts in, I was 16, I think, in 1966 or so, and I came from a small town, and kind of like a farming community, and a lot of people in the town worked in the steel mill, and it was a very religious place, a lot of Christians and churches and stuff, and by the time I was 16, I had believed that I had a very small mind. And, I was listening to Bob Dylan and the Byrds and that sort of thing, and I heard about mind expansion. And it sounded like a good thing, and it sounded like something that I really needed. But I didn't know how to go about it, because there's nobody in my town that was into mind expansion, so I couldn't go anywhere and ask anybody. And I had a couple friends who were interested in the same thing, but we were all in the same boat. I mean, what do you do? So I tried transcendental meditation, but I knew that the Maharishi said that you needed a mantra, a personal mantra, that he had to give you, or some qualified person had to give you, and I didn't have one, and I couldn't find anybody that would do that for me, so I got nowhere. I meditated and nothing happened. Then I thought, okay, maybe if I go out and buy some incense and some Ravi Shankar music. So one night I turned off the lights in my room and lit some incense and put on Ravi Shankar and was lying on my bed waiting for the mind to expand. Nothing happened. My grandmother came up and said, "What are you doing? I smell the smoke. What's going on up there? Are you trying to burn down the house?" And I said, "No, Grammy, I'm just relaxing." That didn't work either. Now, a friend of mine had this really interesting idea. I wasn't going to try it unless it worked for him. If you jump out of a moving car, will this expand your mind? So I said, okay, well, let's give it a try. So we got our friend that had a car, and we went out and we went down to like maybe 20 miles an hour. And my friend was, "I'm jumping out," and I said, "Okay," and he did. And I was surprised how hard he hit the ground. I mean, he rolled, in this field. And so we stopped and came back, and how did it go? And it just hurts, that's all. So that just wasn't happening. Now, around the same time, I had to find a college that would accept me, because it was either that or go to Vietnam, and I didn't want to do that. So I applied to a bunch of junior colleges, and they all turned me down. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then a friend of mine said, "Have you ever thought of Goddard College?" And I had never heard of it. She said, "It's an experimental school, and they might accept you." So I applied, and it looked interesting, and I thought maybe I got a shot. And I went up there for an interview. Now, I had a C- average in school, and my SATs were below average. And all the teachers could ever say about me was that he had failed to live up to his potential. So when I went up there, I thought, well, I've got to convince them that I'm worthy. So I wanted to come off good in the interview, and I said, I really want to help you, because I have a lot of apathy. And he said, you mean empathy? Yes, empathy. I have a lot of empathy. And I think they felt so sorry for me that they accepted me. So I went back to my Pennsylvania small town and bought a vinyl suitcase. I'd never had a suitcase before with a zipper, and I took that and went up to Vermont, and it's a beautiful place. It used to be a farm, the rolling hills, and it was a very small student population. The whole there were two campuses, Greatwood and Northwood, and they were about, well, there's a footpath between them, and it was about a 15-minute walk. And each of them had about a little more than 400 students. It was really small. And so now, that school was every parent's nightmare. In 1968, let me tell you. It had a good track record for developing talent, people that were focused, and people that knew what they wanted, and people that could actually work on their own. They had not anticipated the freshman class of 1968. We had all graduated from the Summer of Love, and we were looking for more. And so, no adult supervision. None. Classes, forget about it, They were held in the dorms. If you could get out of bed and walk into the lobby, you were in class. Grades, no grades. Pass, fail. You decide if you pass or not. That's all you have to do. It was very loose. Now, there were people that came out of that school who used the resources and used the expertise and did very good. I was there for a year and a half. I knew that wasn't my place. But in the year and a half I was there, David Mamet was a student there, who went on to win a Pulitzer Prize, wrote the screenplay for Untouchables, he's a well-known writer. Jonathan Katz was there in my dorm. He became Dr. Katz of the animation thing. Howard Ashman was in my freshman class. Anybody know Howard Ashman is? Howard Ashman wrote the screenplay for Little Shop of Horrors, the lyrics for Little Mermaid, the lyrics for Beauty and the Beast, and worked on Aladdin until he died of AIDS. And so it was a heavy place. They were like relatives of celebrities. Woody Guthrie's son was going there, and Pete Singer's son was going there. But my favorite was Francesca. Francesca was this beautiful woman, granddaughter of Geronimo. Now how cool is that? Man, granddaughter of Geronimo. So you had that going. It was very intimidating. And then you had just people with egos. And then you had all these people from Scarsdale, New York, who were really into having just fun parties. So I felt overwhelmed, and I thought in this place I could surely find the guide I needed for my mind expansion trip. I had seen Timothy Leary on television, and I knew how this worked. You got yourself into a certain level of consciousness, and then you were in danger, and then you needed a guide to take you over the hill into the last level, into death and rebirth. And I knew that none of my freshman cohorts were up to that job. So I sort of waited it out. I took a film class, and it was really the only class that I took in the whole time I was there that I thought I actually did some decent work. And in the film class, there was this guy who, I'm a heterosexual, okay? Don't get me wrong. I was in love with this guy from the moment I saw him. There was something about him. I got to be with this guy. I got to be his friend, and I was just drawn to him. And he was not interested in me whatsoever, right? He was a little older than me, just by a couple years. He dressed different than the other people on campus. Everybody on the campus dressed like farmers, They had like flannel shirts and coveralls and work boots. but they were from wealthy families. I didn't get it. I mean, I left farm town, you know, and I was here again. Now Richard, he looked really cool. He had a black motorcycle jacket, blue jeans, motorcycle boots, this beautiful orange red hair, Fu Manchu mustache. I mean, he looked the part of what was hip. So we were in the film class together, and I made a couple pretty interesting films. First one was Bring Her On to Rosie, Suicide. Second one was Man Beats Another Man to Death with a Chain. And the content of it was not so good, but the technical work was good. I used different angles, different editing, and so he noticed this, and he said to me, he said, let's make a movie together. So I went, okay, this is great, man. I get to be with my idol here and then make a film. What do you got in mind? He said, well, let's take your camera and we'll take a road trip and we'll go to New York City, and I got some friends up there and do some shooting. It's great. Now, as an artist, Richard, his technique worked very well for him. He was a psychedelic artist. He would get into a psychedelic state, and he would paint what he saw. And then when he saw what he painted in a psychedelic state, he would continue to paint. And just to describe one of his paintings, it was called I think he called it The Non-Believer. And in this painting, at first you saw this canvas and you couldn't figure out what was going on. It just looked like a mess. The longer you looked at it, the more you were able to see things, images. There was a shark in there was a guy with a harpoon, things like that. Then if you looked at it long enough, in my experience anyway, you would see in the corner of the painting, upper right-hand corner of the painting, there was a figure of a man on a cross being crucified. And then when you looked further, you would see on the other side of the painting, there was also another crucifixion. And then just about that point, you saw the whole painting was the crucifixion of Jesus. And that's what he did. I mean, and he would put himself into a psychedelic state and paint, and he would do great stuff. So he said, okay, well, let's go to New York. So I said, okay. So we drive up to New York, and on the way to New York, it starts to snow somewhere, I think, around Massachusetts, I think. And he said, let's get out, because I'm making it snow. I want you to film this, because I'm making it snow. So I get out, take the camera, and it's dark, and I film him, and it's snowing, and nothing's happening. And I looked at it later, I couldn't see anything. So then we go to a couple places that he's, where we crash at, in the language of the day, we crashed there. And he said, okay, I want to sit here in a meditation position, meditating. I want you to shoot me meditating. So I shot him meditating, and I said, I want you to shoot that beaded curtain over there. So I shot that, and I'm going to meditate behind that beaded curtain. I want you to shoot that. So I did that. And so that's basically what I did. I held all these still shots of Richard meditating. Now, what mistake he had made was that he thought filmmaking was the same as painting. That I could shoot what was inside his head. And it didn't come out. It just looked really boring. So we took it back to the school, had it developed, took it back to the school, and started editing it. And I said, the only way this is ever going to look anyway decent is just cut it up into slices and just put it together randomly, you know? And I said, what I really like to do is to find some cuttings from some other people's films and put that in there too, right? Give me some variety, which is what we did. It was awful. Our soundtrack was a overdub of the Grateful Dead's album Anthem and Ravi Shankar. So if this wasn't psychedelic, I didn't know what was, right? And that's the last thing I ever did with filmmaking. But it was fun. We had a good time. Well, at that point, just make sure I cover everything. Goddard had this policy where he would take off from January to March and go out and find a job and work somewhere. And it was supposed to be related to what you were doing, but they really didn't care. So Richard just took off for California Now I went to Syracuse and worked at Syracuse Psychiatric Institute in a mental hospital with no training. I came back to school damaged. And, and I'm not saying, I have all sympathy for mental patients, but I didn't belong there. And I had no other friends. And all the people in my building were either on welfare or drug dealers who were all arrested by the time while I was there. I just was crazy, I just couldn't deal with this. So I finished my 2 months, and that's another story, and I should tell that that's a good story. I'll tell it some other time, my time at Syracuse Psychiatric. But got back to God, it really messed up. And Richie came back from California, and he had a whole supply of things that he needed to paint, right? And so he said, okay, just take it easy. And we spent a lot of time in his room and just playing music. And he wasn't a good musician at all, but he had this drum, he liked it. And I had a guitar, acoustic guitar that I was getting used to playing, and we just do that for hours. Now what he taught me, he wasn't trying to teach me, what I learned from him was that there were two ways to play music. And the only way that I knew to play music was from the outside in. I would listen to somebody like Bob Dylan and try to sound like Bob Dylan. Or I would listen to someone like Eric Clapton and try to sound like Eric Clapton. But he taught me, just do this. Just go from the inside out, like his painting. And I just did that. Later on, when I got more serious and learned more about how to play guitar and stuff, I never lost that spot, where that comes from. Well, let's say it's about late March or early April in Vermont, and I really want to do the psychedelic experience. And he never offered to be my guide or anything. I think I asked him a couple of times. He said, "Oh, okay, not now." So one night, I decided this was going to be the night, and I got into a state. And I didn't tell anybody about it, but I was going to make sure that he was going to be with me. So I was sitting in the dorm room, in the lobby, right? It was like three of us were talking, me, Richard, this other guy, Jamie, who had stopped flying, right? He's a nice guy. And so we were talking, and then I started to feel, and the first two levels of the psychedelic experience are not too bad. It's just like the ceiling's melting, right? And the walls are melting. But the second level is more like colors, neon colors, people's auras around them, and it's okay. Third and fourth levels, watch out, man, it's a doozy. So I was sitting there, and I started to hear this whirring sound in my head. And it sounded like cogs going round and round at different pitches, And that really got to me. And I started to get afraid. And then the echoes came. And then, at that point, I wasn't talking anymore. And Richard and Jamie were talking, and they'd say, "What are you going to do this summer?" And what are you doing in California? And it was everywhere. The echoes were driving me nuts. So I was looking at Jamie, and I had this moment where I looked at his eyes, and his eyes looked like they were starting to spin like those art comics, And that's when I completely lost my mind. I went from frozen solid to a raving maniac. So I jumped out of my chair and started walking back in the room. Somebody's poisoning me. There's strychnine in this stuff. And then I ran out of the dorm. And Richard ran after me because he was, he knew that if a guard found me, they were going to call an ambulance or call the police, and they were going to take me away. So he took me to his room. He had a roommate who was basically an alcoholic, but he had lots of tranquilizers there. And so he said, "You got any Nebutols, or phenobarbital?" And the guy said, "No, I'm sorry, I don't have any." So then he said, I don't know what he said because I can't remember what he said. But he took me by the hand, and he took me down to the path that goes between the two campuses, all right? Now, when you're in this kind of state of utter fear, paranoia, it lasts about 3 to 4 hours. And so his plan was just to walk up and down this path. No one was going to bother us. It was probably, by that time, it was around 10 o'clock at night. In my mind, I was sure that he was going to kill me. Out of compassion, you know? Honestly, you know, he was going to kill me out of compassion. There was no, you know, he was my friend, and I was so messed up that I had to die. So we were walking down the path, and I asked him, I thought he was taking me to some strange place to kill me. And so he walked down the path, and I asked him, why are we going this way? So then he turns around the other way, and he walked down the path, and I'm saying, why are we going that way? You know? Then he realized that he was dealing with someone who had lost their mind. And so we walked back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I kept on and on about this, you know. When are you going to kill me? When are you going to kill me? When are you going to kill me? So at one point, he says, okay, I'm going to kill you right now, right? He said, stand over there, and I'm going to be behind you, and I'm going to shoot you, right? So I'm standing there, and he's behind me, and I hear this boom, and I feel the ripples through my body. I fall down on the ground. My soul had left my body. I was dead, right? And I never, you know, of course I never been dead. I didn't know what being dead was like, so I was dead, right? And I was there for a while, and I thought, you know, I didn't, you know, okay, this is death. This is your consciousness, but you're dead. So I felt sorry. I felt bad about my mother. You know, I wish I hadn't done this because my mother's going to be really sad. You know, and so I wish you'd let me lay there for a while. And he came over and he said, you know, you're not dead. Now, why should I believe him, right? Because he killed me, right? Why should I believe him? He said, no, you're not dead. I just clapped my hands, you know, and you know, you believed God when you were shot. You know, get up. So he convinced me to get out. At that point, I was starting to turn around towards being, you know, sort of like a normal state. I still had to walk up and down the path, you know, for another couple hours, but I had no longer believed that he was going to kill me. I didn't believe I was going to die. I just believed I did something really stupid. I was embarrassed. Right? So after that, I realized that I was not ready for level 1 at all. I had to work things out in my head because that was a lot. So now the rest of that semester, Richard and a very good friend of mine named Mary Noguchi, a Japanese American, had a thing, as they say, and they became very attached to each other. I think I was Mary's best friend, and for one reason, I was the only guy that never tried to hit on her, and we just talked a lot. And Richard was my best friend, and they were together. I felt like for the first time in my life, I had a mom and dad. You know, I mean, I grew up without a dad, so I was so happy. Well, what I haven't told you about Richard is that his parents were interesting people. They both were in the CIA. And Richard's mother had died about a year or so before he entered Goddard. And his father was still alive, but his mother had died in Saigon. Dad was doing desk work. His dad was named Bose, you know. So Bose came up to visit, right? Now, Bose is not your typical dad. Bose liked to drink with the boys, carry on with the boys. He was, you know, he liked the carouse. So we had this one night where he was there and we were drinking. It was one of the few times we ever drank. No one really ever drank there. Bose liked to take a microphone. We had a tape recorder that we used as an amplifier. And he liked to talk to me. He liked to give sermons. Right? I think he came from a very religious family. And he liked to sing Old Rugged Cross. And we liked to sing Old Rugged Cross too. Richard and I did that a lot. We loved the song Old Rugged Cross. I'm not a Christian either. You know, but, and neither was he. Now, Richard had The reason Richard was the way he was because he had spent time transforming himself from a street hood to an artist. And the person that he met that helped it, sort of his partner in enlightenment, say, was this guy named Jeffrey. Jeffrey was the most charismatic person I ever met. He might have been like from the farm country or something. There was this really down-to-earth nature about him. Piercing eyes, very persuasive. I wouldn't say he was manipulative. But he and Richard sort of hooked up together in Washington, D.C. and formed a little commune with another guy named Mark Fretchett, well, mentioned later, I think. And they had a few women there. And they became quite notorious in the D.C. area. They were known as the Lamont Street Loonies. Well, Jeffrey was around. I don't want to mention him because he comes up later in the story. Jeffrey was around too. Similarly, Boaz comes. And then he's there for a day or two, and then he leaves. Well, right after he leaves, for some reason unexplained at the time, Richard left Mary. And he wouldn't see her, and she wouldn't talk to me about it, and he wouldn't talk to me about it. This went on for about a week or two, and finally, one night, you have one of those states where you don't sleep, and you just talk all the time, and you just I wouldn't stop talking to him about Mary. Then you love Mary. She loves you. What's the problem? Well, I harassed him long enough to get him to sort of agree to give it another go, which they did. What I didn't know, and I found out later, was Boaz had raped Mary. And at the time, it wasn't called rape. Mary was just unconscious, as she often was. Mary told another guy who told me. Richard never told me. We never talked about it, But he put it behind him, And they got back together. And this is sort of like at the end of the semester. And we're getting ready to go home, or where we're going. And at the time, all of us were going to Washington, D.C. for different reasons. Right before I left, I had this dream. In the dream, I was in this house at Goddard. And there is a mansion there where they have events, old house. And I went, and there was an old woman in the house. And she said, you have to come down to the basement. So I went down to the basement, and she had this big book. And she says, I said, what's in the book? She says, she opened it up and turned the page, and she said, it's about Richard. I said, well, what is it? She says, he can't be saved. And then the next thing I know, I'm in another room. It's a steel room. It's a metal room. And there's a huge bathtub in the room. And Richard's sitting in the bathtub naked. And Mary is there and I am there. And no one's talking. And no one's even moving. So I never really thought about the dream at all. I remembered it later on, but it didn't register anything. Well, we all went back to Washington, D.C., and I was staying with this friend of mine. And then Richard and Mary came by on his motorcycle. He had bought a new motorcycle with some money that he got from his mother's inheritance. And God, when he came in the door, I couldn't stop shaking, I was shaking like a leaf. And him too. And so he leaves. And about 2 weeks later, I got the letter. Richard and Jeffrey are dead. They were killed in a motorcycle accident one morning coming down from this mountain. And that's sort of like the end of my relationship with Richard. Of course, he's dead. I took care of Mary for a few weeks. Then I left Goddard, went to Hawaii. And I had one more chance in Hawaii of getting to level 1. Went on the beach in Hawaii, got myself situated, got there. I can't tell you what it's like because you can't describe it. But once you go there, there's no reason to go back. You know? I just feel grateful that he was my friend at the time because I needed someone to save me.